What if a cast of burned-out actors, famous for a show they had long grown to resent, suddenly found themselves living it for real? That is the impossible premise behind one of 1999's most surprising films. Galaxy Quest arrived looking like a lightweight comedy. But beneath the jokes and the alien costumes was something far more ambitious. A film that genuinely understood why science fiction matters to the people who love it. What kept it from becoming just another spoof? The answer starts with one very deliberate creative decision, one that transformed this parody into something audiences never expected. Number 1, a parody that became a love letter. The concept seems simple on paper. Take a group of burned-out actors famous for a beloved sci-fi show and thrust them into a real version of the adventures they've spent years pretending to have. But what makes this film genuinely special is how deliberately that premise was designed to evolve as the story unfolds. From the opening convention scenes, the movie establishes its characters as people trapped by their own legacy, resented by castmates, exploited by fans, going through the motions of careers they have long stopped believing in. It is played for laughs, but the emotional groundwork is being laid with real precision. The writers understood that for the parody to work, audiences first needed to genuinely care about these people. As the story shifts from satire to sincere adventure, something remarkable happens. The film quietly stops winking at the camera and begins playing everything straight. The heroes earn their heroism. The stakes feel real. By the time the crew faces its greatest challenge, the comedy is transformed into something with genuine emotional weight. That shift from cynicism to sincerity is what separates Galaxy Quest from virtually every other spoof of its era. Number 2, the day the set literally melted. Behind every great production are the disasters nobody planned for. And this film had one that the crew still talks about. During production, a significant portion of the main set was covered in mylar, the highly reflective silver material chosen to give the spaceship interior its sleek, futuristic appearance. The problem became obvious the moment the studio lights went on. Under the intense heat, the mylar began warping, bubbling, and pulling away from the surfaces it had been carefully applied to. What was supposed to be a polished cinematic environment quickly turned into something far less cooperative. The crew scrambled to manage the damage while production attempted to continue around the chaos. It is a behind-the-scenes moment that perfectly captures the unpredictable nature of filmmaking. Solutions were improvised, schedules were disrupted, and the team had to adapt under pressure. Much like the fictional crew they were filming, the finished result on screen gives no hint of the ordeal, which is perhaps the best testament to how well the production ultimately recovered. Number 3, a casting fight changed everything. Few decisions in Hollywood carry more weight than the choice of a leading actor. And in this case, a disagreement over exactly that choice fundamentally altered the entire project. What has often been described in vague terms as a creative departure was in reality a direct conflict over who should stand at the center of the film. Director Harold Ramis had a specific vision. He wanted Alec Baldwin for the part of Jason Nesmith, a performer whose theatrical intensity he felt was right for the character. The studio, however, had a different name in mind. Tim Allen, whose comedic background and broad audience appeal made him the more commercially attractive option. Ramis could not reconcile the two visions and chose to walk away from the project entirely. The departure opened the door for Dean Parisot to take over as director, and Allen was cast in the lead. Looking back, it is remarkable to consider how differently the movie might have felt with Ramis at the helm and Baldwin in the role. The version audiences ultimately saw, warmer, more comedic, more earnest, owes much of its identity to a casting dispute that most viewers never knew happened. Number 4, the studio marketed it all wrong. Getting audiences into seats for a film that defies easy categorization is one of Hollywood's oldest challenges, and Galaxy Quest presented that challenge in full. DreamWorks struggled to find the right angle to sell a movie that was simultaneously a comedy, a sci-fi adventure, and a deeply sincere tribute to a genre most studios treated as niche. Early promotional materials leaned heavily into broad comedy, positioning the film as lightweight family entertainment. Some trailers even incorporated visual effects that had not been finished yet, presenting scenes in a rough, unpolished state that undersold the movie's genuine cinematic quality. The result was marketing that failed to communicate what actually made the film worth seeing. The box office performance at release was solid but unspectacular, widely considered a reflection of this mispositioning. Audiences who expected a throwaway comedy were sometimes caught off guard by how genuinely thrilling the film became. Word of mouth eventually corrected the narrative and the movie found the audience it deserved, but not before a marketing campaign had already set expectations in entirely the wrong direction. Number 5, the idea came from Leonard Nimoy. Every great film starts somewhere, and the creative spark behind this one traces back to an unexpected source. Writer David Howard has spoken about how a specific moment involving Star Trek actor Leonard Nimoy first planted the seed for what would eventually become the screenplay. Observing how deeply Nimoy had become identified with the role of Spock, and how complicated that relationship appeared to be for the actor personally, Howard began thinking about the broader phenomenon of performers defined and sometimes confined by iconic sci-fi roles. That observation grew into a larger exploration of fandom, identity, and what it actually means to live in the shadow of a character the world refuses to let you leave behind. The early drafts focused closely on those themes before the story expanded into a full adventure narrative. But the emotional core that Nimoy's story inspired never disappeared. The tension between resenting a role and ultimately finding real meaning in it runs through the entire film, and it gives Galaxy Quest a depth that pure parody rarely achieves. Number 6. The movie was once R-rated. The film audiences fell in love with his warm, funny, and broadly accessible, but that was not always the plan. An earlier version of Galaxy Quest carried a significantly darker tone with sharper edges and adult language that pushed it firmly into R-rated territory. The creative team originally envisioned something more biting, closer in spirit to a genuine satire than the adventure-comedy hybrid it eventually became. During the editing process, the studio intervened. Concerned about limiting the potential audience, they pushed for cuts and re-recorded dialogue that would bring the rating down to PG. Some of the replacement lines were dubbed in post-production, and the scenes occasionally show. Careful viewers have noticed moments where the actors' lip movements do not quite match the words being spoken on screen. The most frequently cited example involves a certain frustrated outburst from Sigourney Weaver's character, where the substituted word is fairly obvious to anyone paying attention. What is fascinating is how little the film's personality seems to suffer from the change. The warmth that replaced the sharper edges arguably served the story better, allowing the emotional beats to land without the cynicism undercutting them. Still, the traces of that earlier version scattered throughout the film serve as a quiet reminder that the movie almost took a very different road, and that somewhere out there, a rougher cut of this story once existed. Number 7. By Grabthar's hammer was never meant to stay. Some of cinema's most iconic lines were never supposed to survive the writing process. The oath spoken by Alexander Dane throughout the film, melodramatic, absurd, delivered with theatrical solemnity, began its life as a simple placeholder, a dummy line inserted into the script while the writers searched for something better. The problem was that nobody could find anything funnier. Cast and crew kept laughing at it during readings, and the line's ridiculous grandeur proved impossible to top. It stayed in the script by default, then gradually became something the production leaned into deliberately. Alan Rickman, who had a gift for wringing maximum effect from minimum movement, delivered it with such committed seriousness that the joke deepened every time it appeared. What nobody fully anticipated was how that repetition would pay off emotionally. By the time the line appears in its most pivotal scene, spoken not as a joke but as a genuine farewell, audiences who had laughed at it multiple times suddenly found themselves caught off guard by how much it meant. A throwaway placeholder had become the emotional centerpiece of the film's most powerful moment. It is one of the better accidental achievements in modern screenwriting and a reminder that sometimes the line you keep as a joke turns out to be the one that matters most. Number 8. The frame expands at one key moment. Visual storytelling operates on details that most viewers absorb without consciously registering them, and this film uses one of those details with quiet precision. The movie does not gradually widen its image as the story progresses. Instead, it employs two distinct aspect ratios that switch at a carefully chosen moment, marking a specific turning point in the narrative. The transition occurs when Jason Nesmith first approaches the bay doors of the Protector and looks out into actual space for the first time. Up to that point, the film has been operating in a narrower frame, grounded, confined, earthbound. The moment he crosses into the reality of what is happening, the image expands. It is a subtle shift, but it functions as a visual declaration that the world of the story has fundamentally changed. Few audiences notice it in real time, but the effect registers emotionally even when it does not register consciously. The expanded frame feels more cinematic, more open, more serious. It signals that the characters and the film itself are no longer playing around. For a movie so invested in the idea of fiction becoming reality, it is a remarkably elegant way to mark the exact moment that transformation occurs. Number 9. Lawyers design the starship. It is not often that a film's legal department gets credited as a creative force, but the design of the NSCA Protector owes more to copyright attorneys than to any single art director. From the earliest stages of pre-production, the filmmakers were acutely aware that their fictional starship could not bear too close a resemblance to a certain iconic vessel from a competing franchise. Lawyers were brought in specifically to review design drafts and flag anything that crossed into legally problematic territory. The process shaped decisions about the ship's silhouette, its interior layout, and even the fine details of its registry markings. The result was a vessel that reads immediately as a sci-fi starship while remaining distinctly its own creation. The production team found ways to work creatively within the legal boundaries and in some cases turned those constraints into jokes. The ship's registry number was quietly noted in production materials as NTE, standing for Not the Enterprise. The finished design succeeds on both levels simultaneously. It is familiar enough that audiences instantly understand what kind of ship it is, but distinct enough that it belongs entirely to the story. What could have been a frustrating legal obstacle instead became a design challenge that pushed the team towards something more original and gave them one of the production's best inside jokes in the process. Number 10. Weaver was blocked by Ramis. There is a persistent assumption that studio executives were responsible for any resistance to casting a major star in a supporting role. But the reality behind Sigourney Weaver's path into this film is more specific than that. The obstacle was not corporate caution. It was the original director himself. Harold Ramis had a clear position. He did not want actors with strong existing associations with science fiction. His reasoning was rooted in a concern about audience distraction, that recognizable faces from the genre would pull viewers out of the film's carefully constructed fictional world. Weaver, whose identity had been shaped significantly by the Alien franchise, fell squarely into that category. As long as Ramis was attached, the door was effectively closed. When Ramis departed over the casting dispute detailed earlier, that restriction left with him. Dean Parasot brought no such reservations to the project, and Weaver was approached and cast. Her performance, playing an actress who exists primarily to repeat what the ship's computer says and look good doing it, became one of the film's consistent sources of comedy. The role could easily have been thankless, but she brought enough self-awareness and timing to make it memorable. The film is noticeably better for her presence, which makes Ramis' original objection one of the more fortunate obstacles in the production's history. Number 11. The Thermian voice had a trick. Creating a convincing alien species requires more than costume design and makeup. The voice has to do an enormous amount of work. For the Thermians, that voice emerged not from a team of sound designers, but from a single actor's instinct during an early audition. What Enrico Colantoni brought into the room that day became the sonic blueprint for an entire civilization. The technique Colantoni employed drew on formal acting training, specifically a method of producing sound from an unusual position in the vocal tract, giving his speech a reedy, slightly breathless quality that felt genuinely non-human without tipping into parody. Director Dean Parasot responded immediately. Rather than adjusting or refining what Colantoni had done, he recognized it as exactly the right foundation and asked the rest of the cast playing Thermians to study and replicate it. The result is one of the film's quieter technical achievements. Every Thermian in the movie sounds like they belong to the same species, not because of post-production processing, but because a group of actors learned to produce the same unusual vocal quality by ear. It gives the aliens a consistency that makes them feel genuinely believable, which matters enormously in a film where the audience needs to accept that these creatures have traveled across the galaxy to find a group of television actors. The voice, more than almost anything else, makes that leap of faith possible. Number 12. The red shirt joke was real. Few comedic conceits in the film are rooted more firmly in genuine genre history than the story of Guy Fleegman, a background performer from the original television show who never had a character name, never had a defined role, and spends the entire runtime convinced he is about to meet a terrible end. The joke is specific enough to reward fans and accessible enough to entertain everyone else. The expendable crewman tradition stretches back to the earliest days of Star Trek, where a pattern quickly emerged. Characters introduced without established histories had a tendency not to survive the episode. Audiences began anticipating it, then joking about it, and eventually the trope became one of the most recognizable conventions in all of science fiction. Fleegman exists as a loving tribute to every unnamed crew member who ever put on a uniform and did not make it to the end credits. Sam Rockwell understood exactly what he had been given and committed to it completely. His performance is built on sustained, barely contained panic, the performance of a man who has watched enough of the show to know precisely what his role in the story is likely to be. The physical comedy is sharp, the timing is impeccable, and the character's eventual arc pays off the setup with real satisfaction. It is a joke that works on multiple levels simultaneously, which is precisely the kind of writing that makes this film so rewatchable. Number 13. A casting gamble paid off. The character of Leiliari, warm, devoted, and genuinely alien in a way that somehow remains completely endearing, required a performer capable of doing something very specific. Playing an extraterrestrial so sincerely that the comedy surrounding her never diminishes the emotional reality she brings to the role. Finding that performer turned out to be one of the more pressured decisions of the casting process. The casting director had seen a significant number of auditions without finding someone who felt right. When Missy Pyle came in, the response was immediate. But the decision to push for her over other options came with professional stakes attached. The casting director was going out on something of a limb, advocating strongly for a performer who was at that point relatively unknown at the feature film level. Reputations in that industry are shaped by exactly these kinds of calls. The gamble paid off in every scene Pyle appears in. She plays the character's devotion with complete sincerity, never undercutting it with ironic distance, which is precisely why it is so funny and so oddly touching at the same time. The romantic subplot she shares with Tony Shalhoub's character works because she commits to it without reservation. A more cautious casting choice might have produced a perfectly adequate performance, but Pyle brought something specific and irreplaceable that a safer option almost certainly would not have delivered. Number 14. Shalhoub's secret acting choice. Every ensemble film has at least one performer who quietly steals scenes without appearing to try. And in this case, that performer is Tony Shalhoub. While his castmates were playing panic, ego, and existential crisis, Shalhoub constructed a character defined almost entirely by an unshakable, almost pharmaceutical sense of calm. The contrast alone is consistently hilarious. The choice was entirely deliberate. Rather than mirroring the heightened energy around him, Shalhoub decided that Tech Sergeant Chen would respond to every new crisis, alien encounters, teleportation, near-death experiences, with the same mild, slightly distracted equanimity. Where other characters escalate, Chen simply processes. The approach created a performance built on negative space, where the humor lives in what the character does not do rather than what he does. Small physical details reinforce the characterization throughout filming. The near-constant snacking that became one of Chen's defining traits was not scripted in detail. It evolved as Shalhoub found ways to visually express a man who remains grounded in immediate physical pleasures regardless of the chaos surrounding him. The result is a performance that operates on a completely different frequency from everyone else in the film. And the contrast makes both the comedy and the ensemble dynamic significantly richer. It is the kind of subtle, considered work that tends to get overlooked in favor of more demonstrative performances, but remove it and something essential disappears. Number 15. Alien School made the move. Costume and makeup can establish the appearance of an alien species, but movement is what makes an audience genuinely believe in one. For the actors playing the Thermians, looking the part was never going to be enough. The production needed them to inhabit their bodies in ways that felt authentically non-human, and achieving that required a structured approach to physical preparation. The solution was an informal but intensive period of movement training that the cast nicknamed Alien School. Drawing on the visual language of older puppet-based science fiction shows, where physical limitations of the medium had produced movement styles that were stiff, deliberate, and oddly fascinating, the actors practiced eliminating the natural fluidity of human motion. Every gesture was made more considered. Every shift in posture was slightly slower, slightly more mechanical than instinct would suggest. The discipline shows in the finished film in ways that are easy to take for granted. The Thermians move as a group with a consistency that would have been very difficult to achieve without that shared preparation. More importantly, when moments of genuine emotion break through, when the aliens respond to kindness or fear or loss, the contrast between their usual controlled stillness and those flashes of feeling lands with unexpected power. The physical vocabulary that Alien School created gave the filmmakers something to work against, and the results are visible in some of the film's most quietly affecting scenes. Number 16. The captain was not Shatner. The most obvious assumption about the character of Jason Nesmith, a swaggering, self-absorbed captain of a beloved sci-fi television series, is that Tim Allen simply studied William Shatner and built his performance from there. It is a reasonable assumption, and one that the film's marketing did little to discourage. The reality, however, is more interesting. Allen has spoken about looking elsewhere entirely for his physical and emotional blueprint. The actor he kept returning to was Yul Brynner, specifically the regal, almost imperious commanding presence Brynner brought to roles in films like The Magnificent Seven and The King and I. Where Shatner's famous style leans into earnest intensity and rhythmic line delivery, Brynner projected something more architectural, a man who occupies space as if it belongs to him by right. That quality, Allen felt, was closer to what Nesmith actually needed. The choice pays dividends throughout the film in ways that are not immediately obvious. Nesmith's arc requires the audience to believe that this man, vain, difficult, and deeply insecure beneath the bluster, can credibly become a genuine leader when the situation demands it. A Shatner impression, however skillful, would have kept the character at a comedic distance. The Brynner influence gave him a foundation of authentic authority that makes the transition from parody to hero feel earned rather than convenient. It is one of the film's less discussed creative decisions, and one that rewards closer attention on every rewatch. Number 17. Rickman protected the film's depth. Every ensemble has a center of gravity, a performer whose commitment to the material sets the standard for everyone around them. On this production, that role was filled by Alan Rickman, and he filled it with the same precision and quiet authority he brought to every project he touched. Rickman was not interested in playing Alexander Dane as a joke. From his earliest work on the character, he pushed back against any interpretation that reduced Dane to a one-note comic figure, the embittered Shakespearean actor trapped inside a rubber forehead, resenting every moment. He insisted on treating the character's frustrations as genuine, his dignity as real, and his eventual emotional journey as something that deserved to be played with complete sincerity. Behind the scenes, he contributed ideas specifically aimed at preserving the character's credibility during moments where the comedy could easily have tipped into mockery. The impact of that commitment is most visible in the film's most emotionally demanding scene, the moment when Dane's most repeated line stops being funny and becomes something else entirely. That scene works because Rickman had spent the entire film building a character with genuine depth, not performing a caricature. Without that foundation, the emotional payoff would have had nothing to stand on. Rickman's presence elevated every scene he appeared in, and his influence on the film's overall tone extended well beyond his own performance. The cast has spoken warmly about how his seriousness gave them all permission to go further than they might have otherwise. Number 18. Real effects made the comedy work. A lesser production might have leaned into deliberately cheap effects as part of the joke, winking at the audience with unconvincing visuals designed to signal that everyone was in on the humor. This film made the opposite choice, and it is one of the most important creative decisions in its entire production history. The visual effects work was taken entirely seriously. Industrial Light and Magic handled significant portions of the film's effects, approaching the assignment with the same standards they brought to productions that had no comedic dimension whatsoever. The space sequences, the ship exteriors, the alien environments, all of it was executed with genuine craft and a commitment to creating something that could stand alongside the best science fiction of its era. The production understood something that many spoofs miss. Comedy that exists within a credible world is significantly funnier than comedy that exists within a sloppy one. The payoff is visible in every sequence where the film's humor depends on the audience actually believing what they are seeing. When the crew faces a genuine threat, the effects support the tension rather than undercut it. When the Protector moves through space, it looks like a real ship. That credibility does not suppress the comedy. It amplifies it, because jokes land harder when the world around them feels solid. The decision to invest in genuine quality rather than ironic cheapness is part of what separates this film from the long list of parodies that have not aged nearly as well, and helps explain why its effects still hold up decades later. Number 19. Fake fandom became real marketing. Selling a film that exists in the space between parody and sincerity requires a marketing approach that can operate in the same register. And the campaign built around this release attempted something genuinely unusual for its time. Rather than simply advertising the movie as a comedy about a fictional television show, the team committed to presenting that fictional show as if it had actually existed. A mock documentary was produced presenting the cast and history of Galaxy Quest, the television series, not the film, as a real piece of cultural history. Interviews, archival footage, and convention appearances were assembled with enough conviction to blur the line between fiction and promotion. The official website furthered the illusion, designed to resemble a genuine fan community that had grown up around the show over decades rather than a studio marketing portal built weeks before release. What makes this campaign notable in retrospect is how far ahead of its time the underlying instinct was. Immersive world-building marketing, where the promotional materials expand the story's universe rather than simply advertising its existence, has since become a sophisticated industry practice. In 1999, it was still a relatively novel approach, and the campaign executed it with enough commitment to generate genuine curiosity. For audiences who encountered it without context, the line between the fictional show and the real film was genuinely, productively blurry, a fitting reflection of the story's own central theme. Number 20. That house is a real landmark. Production design makes countless decisions that audiences absorb without analyzing. And the choice of location for Jason Nesmith's home is one that carries more meaning than it might initially appear to. The sprawling modernist residence that establishes his celebrity status is not a constructed set. It is a real building with its own remarkable history. The house used for exterior and some interior shots is the Stahl House, formerly known as Case Study House No. 22, perched above Los Angeles in the Hollywood Hills. Designed by architect Pierre Koenig and completed in 1960, it became one of the most photographed pieces of residential architecture in the world, largely due to Julius Schulman's iconic images of its glass-walled rooms suspended above the glittering city below. Its appearance in films, advertisements, and photo shoots over the decades has given it an almost mythological status in Los Angeles visual culture. The choice works on multiple levels for the film. The house reads immediately as the home of someone who has achieved a specific kind of Hollywood success, visible, stylish, and designed to impress rather than simply to shelter. It places Nesmith firmly within a tradition of celebrity excess, while simultaneously connecting the film to a broader visual history of Los Angeles that attentive viewers will recognize. It is the kind of location decision that a production might make quietly and without fanfare, but that adds a genuine layer of texture to the world being constructed on screen, grounding a story about fictional starship captains in something architecturally undeniably real. Number 21. The DVD had an alien language track. Home video releases in the late 1990s were still finding their footing with bonus content. Most discs offered a trailer, perhaps a behind-the-scenes featurette, and little else. The DVD release of this film had other ideas. Among its supplementary features was something that had essentially no precedent: a complete alternative audio track presenting the entire movie dubbed into the Thermian language. The track was not a gimmick assembled carelessly in post-production. It required the voice cast to return and perform the full film in the alien dialect that Enrico Colantoni had originally developed on set, extending that vocal universe from a handful of characters to every line of dialogue in the movie. For dedicated fans, it transformed a repeat viewing into something genuinely new, a way of experiencing the story from inside the fiction rather than looking at it from outside. What makes the inclusion remarkable in retrospect is what it says about how the production understood its audience. The filmmakers recognized that the people most likely to buy the DVD were precisely the kind of devoted fans the film itself celebrates. Viewers who would genuinely want to go deeper into the world being created. It was an act of creative generosity aimed squarely at the passionate minority rather than the casual majority. And it arrived at a moment when that kind of fan-focused thinking was still relatively rare in studio home video releases. In many ways, it was the film's philosophy made physical, a bonus feature that existed purely out of love for the audience it was made for. Number 22. The pig lizard was mostly real. Digital effects were advancing rapidly by the late 1990s, and many productions of that era defaulted to computer-generated creatures simply because the technology was newly available and the novelty was part of the appeal. This film's creature team made a more considered choice, one rooted in a genuine understanding of what makes something feel believable on screen. The pig lizard was built primarily as a practical creation. A performer wore the suit, providing the creature with real physical weight and the kind of unpredictable organic movement that digital creations of that period often struggled to replicate convincingly. Mechanical components were integrated into the costume to handle facial expressions and specific movements that a performer alone could not produce. The combination gave the creature a presence that registered immediately as something genuinely inhabiting the physical space of the scene rather than composited into it afterward. Digital enhancement was used where practical methods reached their limits. But the foundation was always the physical performance. The decision reflects a broader philosophy that ran through much of the film's production design, that the best way to make an audience believe in something fantastic is to give them something real to respond to first. The pig lizard appears on screen for a relatively short time, but its tactile physical quality leaves an impression that lingers. It is a creature that feels like it exists, which is a significantly harder achievement than it might appear, and a reminder that practical craftsmanship, even in an era of rapidly expanding digital capability, still had something irreplaceable to offer. Number 23. Hidden sci-fi references everywhere. Part of what makes a great genre tribute work is the sense that the people who made it have genuinely done the reading. Casual familiarity produces hollow imitation. Deep knowledge produces something richer, a film populated with details that reward attention and signal to those who recognize them that the filmmakers are operating from the same place of genuine love that the audience brings to their seats. The references embedded throughout this movie operate on multiple levels simultaneously. The Klaatu Nebula name-checks the alien visitor from the 1951 classic The Day the Earth Stood Still, a film foundational to the tradition the story inhabits. Visual compositions echo specific scenes from the Star Trek television series and films without directly reproducing them. The structure of several action sequences draws on conventions established across decades of science fiction television, placed just precisely enough to be recognizable without tipping into simple imitation. What is notable is how organically these references are integrated. They do not announce themselves or pause for the audience to appreciate them. They exist as part of the fabric of the film, visible to those who know where to look and invisible to those who do not. That layering is a mark of genuine craft. A film that treats its references as jokes asks the audience to laugh at the source material. A film that treats them as building blocks asks the audience to love it. And that distinction is at the heart of everything that separates this production from lesser attempts at the same territory. The references are not decoration. They're the foundation on which the film's entire emotional argument rests. Number 24. A comedy won major sci-fi awards. The science fiction community has its own awards ecosystem, and it does not typically extend its recognition to comedies. Genre awards tend to flow toward work that engages seriously with speculative ideas, that builds worlds with rigor, that treats its subject matter with the solemnity the community feels it deserves. A parody, however affectionate, would not normally expect to compete in that space. The Saturn Awards, presented annually by the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films, recognized the film in multiple categories following its release. More significantly, it won the Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation in 2000, one of science fiction's most prestigious honors, voted on by the community itself. It was the first and for a long time the only comedic film to receive that recognition. The voters were not being ironic. They were acknowledging that what the film had achieved was genuinely worthy of standing alongside the genre's most serious work. The recognition matters beyond the trophies themselves. It represented the science fiction community formally, declaring that this movie had earned its place within the tradition it was celebrating. That kind of validation from inside the genre, from the people who take it most seriously, confirmed something the film's best moments had already suggested, that the most sincere tribute to science fiction ever made had arrived in the form of a comedy, and the community had noticed. The awards did not change what the film was. They simply made official what thoughtful viewers had understood from the beginning. Number 25. Star Trek actors fully embraced it. The ultimate test of any tribute is whether the people being honored actually recognize themselves in it. And in this case, the verdict from the Star Trek community arrived clearly and without reservation. Cast members from across the franchise's long history have spoken warmly about the film, but a few responses have stood out for their specific enthusiasm. Patrick Stewart, whose own commanding television captain made him an obvious reference point for the entire story, admitted to laughing so hard during his first viewing that he had to leave the theater to compose himself. The response from Will Wheaton went even further. He declared it the best Star Trek movie that was ever made, a statement that generated considerable attention and that he has stood behind in interviews since. These were not polite endorsements offered under promotional obligation. They were genuine expressions of recognition from people who understood precisely what the film was doing and appreciated the depth of craft behind it. What those responses confirm is something the film had been arguing from its opening scene, that loving something deeply enough to understand its flaws, its conventions, and its emotional logic is the highest form of respect you can pay it. Galaxy Quest knew Star Trek well enough to tease it, honor it, and ultimately capture something true about why it matters to the people it matters to. When the actors who built that legacy responded with genuine enthusiasm rather than defensiveness, it completed the film's own arc, a parody that earned the full embrace of the thing it was celebrating. Few films of any genre can claim that kind of ending, both on screen and off. Galaxy Quest endures because it understood something that most parodies never figure out, that the best way to honor something is to take it completely seriously. Every creative risk documented here, from Rickman's quiet insistence on emotional truth to the decision to hire top-tier effects studios for a comedy, points toward a production that genuinely believed in what it was making. The jokes land because the film means them. The emotional moments hit because the film earned them. If this deep dive into one of 1999's most underrated productions left you wanting more, please like the video and subscribe so you never miss another journey behind the scenes of the films that shaped us. What was the secret that surprised you most? Drop it in the comments below.